We just lost legendary comic book creator Jim Shooter. Why is he so legendary? I'm going to tell you in this video. Hi everybody, welcome to Wonder World Comics. I'm Dennis Barger, 45-year veteran of reading comic books, 35-year veteran of selling everything collectible, and 20-year veteran of owning a store. Jim Shooter was a legend. 60 years in the comic book industry. He started when he was 13 years old and he passed away when he was 73. Jim sold his first idea to DC Comics when he was 13 years old. A year later, it got published when he was 14, and it all just kept going from there. Jim worked on Legion of Superheroes for DC. He came up with the idea for the supervillain Parasite. He came up with the idea of having Superman and the Flash race against each other for the first time. These were fresh ideas for an industry that had fed these kids full of comic books their entire lives, and now they were coming out and helping the industry invigorate themselves. Jim graduated from high school. He had a choice: university or work in comics. Jim chose comic books. It was a rough patch. He had to quit a few times, restart a few times, but for the most part, he stayed with comic books. During this period of time, it was also turbulent in the comic book world. Marvel had 8 different editors-in-chief since Stan Lee had left. Nobody had really kind of figured out how to get into that groove and control the entire Marvel universe. Same thing was happening over at DC as well. But we're focusing on Marvel right now. Marvel tapped Jim Shooter, one of the assistant editors for their comic book lines, to be the editor-in-chief. Jim just hit the sweet spot. He worked with some of the best talent that has ever been assembled in the Bronze Age. This is the period of time when Chris Claremont and John Byrne totally re-envisioned the X-Men. This is when Frank Miller totally re-envisioned Daredevil. This is when the Simonsons ran Thor in a totally new direction. Jim Shooter was there for 9 years. Why is he important to a guy like myself? Well, he's the first person to say, hey, these comic book shops are coming into their own. Let's do something exclusive for them. A new idea. During this time, Hollywood was coming and knocking. And Hollywood wanted to do something with this character from the X-Men, Dazzler. Jim Shooter said, hey, let's make a Dazzler comic book exclusive for comic shops, no newsstand. So he took the character and made Dazzler #1. This was going to be a project for, wait for it, Bo Derek. At this period of time, she was the #1 name in actresses. So Bo Derek was going to be Dazzler, and comic shops had the exclusive #1. Much like Hollywood being fickle to comic books at that time, they didn't end up making a Dazzler Bo Derek movie. But the precedent had already been set. Jim Shooter made a hot comic book for comic book stores. This isn't where Jim Shooter's legacy would end with this. During this same period of time, Jim Shooter instituted the art return policy, where creators who created art for Marvel Comics would receive that original art back so they could sell it. This was a first of its kind step in the industry. But not just there, he also implemented the Royalties Project, where comic book creators that were creating for Marvel at that time would get a cut if the comic book exceeded a certain sales number. If they made a toy of that comic book character during that time, not a lot of toys were being made, but they actually would get a piece of it if they did. But let's talk more about what Jim did. Jim Shooter was at the helm for one of the most important periods of time in Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics Secret War. A toy company had come to Marvel and said, hey, we want to make a Marvel toy line, But we don't really have an idea to put Captain America with Spider-Man and Iron Man. How are we going to put all those characters together? Jim Shooter created the concept of Secret Wars, a 12-issue miniseries where all the heroes are abducted from Earth and put on a planet. And they have to battle all of the bad guys of the comic book universe. It was a huge comic book. It was a decent toy line. Everybody made money. But what it did was it took the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics and put them in the driver's seat of a franchise of all the heroes. Before, it had just been this creator doing this creator doing this creator doing this. Occasionally, one of the creators get to play with one of the other creators' toys. This was Jim Shooter playing with all of the toys. During this time, there were a lot of crazy changes in comic books that started before Secret Wars and ended after Secret Wars and kept going in that direction. The biggest of which is Spider-Man's black costume. Jim Shooter had bought the idea of doing a black costume from a kid just like he was, and we're going to take Spider-Man in a new direction, but they had to figure out how to do it. In the middle of Secret Wars is how they pulled it off. Before Secret Wars, there was an issue of Spider-Man 252. And in it, Peter Parker gets back from Secret Wars and he's wearing a black costume. And everybody was excited to find out what happened to Spider-Man on this alien planet. What happened during Secret Wars? You had to read all 12 issues of Secret Wars to find out. In the middle of Secret Wars, Spider-Man gets the black costume. And then, after Secret Wars is over, we find out the black costume is a little bit more than we ever bargained for. This is all from Jim Shooter, coming up with an idea to put everybody in a mixing bowl, give them things to come out of it, and send them in a new direction. It was revolutionary. But it's not just there. Jim Shooter loved toy tie-ins. When he worked over at DC when he was a kid, he did the Action Man comic book to tie in with the Action Man toy for Ideal. He did Secret Wars to tie into a toy line with Mattel. And guess what, guys? He's about to touch one of the biggest franchises of all time, G.I. Joe. Not just G.I. Joe, but also Transformers. He's there at Marvel to make sure the comic book and the toys sync up to be an advertising campaign that 13-year-old Dennis would be watching for. Jim Shooter served as editor-in-chief for 9 years. That's second only to Stan the Man Lee. That's pretty epic for the first 25 years of Marvel Comics. He was there for the 25th anniversary and made all of the issues that came out that year look exactly the same with that awesome border around them, etc. But where did Jim Shooter go wrong? Where did he go wrong? Well, he wanted to come up with a new universe for the 25th anniversary. This new universe would take place outside of the Marvel continuity. And for most part, it was considered a flop. So much so that after that and Secret Wars 2, the greatest comic book maxi series ever, it flopped too. He made too many tie-ins. He made too many of the creators upset that they had to tie in when he didn't want them to tie in. And the two of those flopping at the exact same time forced Jim to have to leave Marvel. And the second he was out, all the knives came out. Oh, Jim was responsible for this. Jim was responsible for that. Well, guess what, guys? Jim was responsible for a lot of great things, and he had 2 giant flops, and he left. But that wasn't the end of Jim Shooter's career. Jim Shooter would later go on to form Valiant Comics. This is kind of the beginning of basically the 4th era of comic books. The first being the Golden Age, the second being the Silver Age, the third being the Bronze Age, and Valiant Comics was there for the modern age of comic books. Valiant didn't last long because that was a very turbulent period of time in comic books. Everybody was chasing everything. Valiant had its moment, but it did not solidify itself as the big third entity in comic books. In fact, it forced the big two to to team up and do the Amalgam Universe to fight all of the indies. After Valiant, Jim Shooter went and did Defiant. I'm sure that was a tongue-in-cheek name for that company because Jim Shooter was defiant with the comic book industry. But he also went on to form Broadway Comic Books with the Saturday Night Live team. That really didn't take off either. Everybody was chasing this opportunity to be the third person under Marvel and DC, and it just never happened because Image had already taken that spot. Jim took every chance he could to get back in. He was brought in to do little projects here or there. He always was at comic book conventions, meeting fans, telling them stories. No holds barred. He would never pull back from a story. He would tell it exactly like it is. This is why I love Jim. Jim told it the truth, whether you like to hear it or not. How did Jim impact my life? Well, first of all, he was the editor-in-chief of all the periods of time that I started reading comic books. He probably edited every one of my favorite comic books for those 9 years. But how did Jim impact with me? Well, I met him at a convention one time. I said, Mr. Shooter, can I buy you a drink? To thank you for all the years that you helped create my favorite comic books. He goes, yeah, absolutely. And while we were waiting for the drink, he started telling me stories. After he got the drink, he kept telling me stories. After I ordered another drink for myself, he kept telling me stories. Jim loved the fans because he was always one of them that made it to the highest pinnacle that you could make in comic books. You can never take that from him. For 30 years, Jim hit the convention circuit. Being Jim Shooter, it was that simple. Now, in death, I think people are realizing how important it is to have somebody like that can have a vision from the fact that he was reading comics at a young age, that he was allowed into the industry before anybody probably ever should have been. But his ideas were so solid that they had to bring him in to get that younger perspective in comics. And at the point at which he reached the height, it was one of the most important periods of time because those 70s kids, like myself, wanted to read continuity. It was something that a lot of comic books didn't care about at that time, and he made it important. Guys, the only thing you can do to honor Jim Shooter is go buy some comic books during the Jim Shooter era. Find out what he was involved with. Go out, find some from your local comic book store, and enjoy what I think is one of the best eras in comic books history. If you like this video, like and subscribe. Either way, rest in peace, Jim Shooter. I'll see you again.